guys. Welcome back to the Left of Str8 Show Interviews, the premier podcast that shares the stories of our amazing LGBTQ community and, of course, fantastic straight allies, all from entertainment, foodies, books, music, and advocacy. I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton, and let's start talking. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Rebecca Fjelland Davis. She's an acclaimed author and storyteller known for her captivating novels and children's book. Rebecca has a knack for creating rich and relatable worlds that speak to readers of all ages. Her young adult novel, Chasing Alley Cat, originally published to great acclaim, is being re-released this year, bringing fresh attention to her dynamic and compelling work. Rebecca's passion for storytelling is only matched by her enthusiasm for dogs, cycling, and the great outdoors, which often influence her writing. Beyond Chasing Alley Cat, her literary portfolio spans both young adults and children's literature, with each story crafted to inspire, challenge, and entertain. I'm excited to dive into her experiences, insights, and the journey that is this fantastic author's ride. Let's go ahead and welcome Miss Rebecca Fjelland Davis. Rebecca, how are you?
Hi, Scott. I'm great. Thank you so much. What a nice, generous introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. You were a highly recommended guest to get on the show, so I'm excited to be able to talk to you. I love speaking to authors. The podcast is all about entertainment, foodies, and books, so books is one of my main things. And we're getting into the winter time, so that's when I really start to hunker down with my hot chocolate and go through about 12 books over 3 months or so. So
That's
I'm
great.
excited.
I like to
Well,
hear
let's
that.
start with a little background for me. Share with me, Rebecca, tell me about where you grew up, and were you always a writer or a reader? Tell me about a little bit of your backstory.
I grew up on a farm in central Iowa. So I was a mile away from any friend I could play with. So I spent a lot of time alone. My mom was a difficult mother to teenagers. She didn't know how to shepherd independence, but she was a wonderful mom to tiny children. She read to me every single day. And by the time I was 4, I knew I wanted to make stories when I got big. So I was
She was
narrating
busy.
my play in third person when I was 4.
Wow.
I would say things like, Becky shuffled down the driveway and watched the dirt puff between her bare toes. I remember that sentence at age 4. and
That's a
then when I
wordsmith
did
in
play with
training right
that one
there. I
friend
love
who
that.
I liked words and I couldn't draw for crap, so I created pictures with words. And when I did
Amazing. And
get to
so,
play with my
did,
best
did
friend who
I'm
lived
sorry
a
to interrupt.
mile
Start over again.
away, I'm sorry. When I did get to play with my best friend who lived a mile away, and I'm still friends with her to this day, I would narrate. We would be playing with dolls, and I would narrate in third person. Elizabeth gasped and leaped over the fence, and she'd go, "What are you doing?" So I was very much into crafting with words from day one. And my
I
dad said
absolutely
I
love
came
that.
home from kindergarten the first day and was so upset because I had not learned to read.
Oh no, I can imagine. Oh my, I love that though. And I mean, most authors are voracious readers and everything too, are inspired by words. So were you a big reader as a kid? Did you have some favorite authors or favorite books while you were growing up?
Oh gosh. Oh yeah, I read a lot. And I was also an outdoors kid. I rode my ponies, I helped my dad chore. If given the option of shoveling manure with my dad or cleaning house with my mom, I picked manure every time. I would much rather be out.
I,
But I read, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was because I would get out of the farm chores any way I could, and reading is a good way to do that. I love that.
Yeah, true. I didn't get out of anything by reading. They knew I would have used that all the time. But I read
Uh,
Lois Lenski. I don't think anybody even knows her anymore. But she wrote a whole series of stories. This would have been in the late 50s and 60s about children who lived in various parts of the country, like Bio Suzette and Corn Farm Boy and Strawberry Girl. And, there was a little kid on a native reservation, and there were probably 30 of them. And I read every single one that our library had. So I loved hers. And then I felt like I learned so much about the world. My world was so much bigger than an Iowa farm. I knew what a bayou was. I knew, what it was like to be on a ranch in Wyoming. So, and then Mary Calhoun wrote a series about a girl named Katie John, who was a diehard tomboy. I related 1,000%, and she got into all sorts of scrapes. I read those 3 books probably 10 times each. And then Caddy Woodlawn by Carol Ryrie Brink was a Newbery winner. And I read that in 5th grade for the first time. And I think I checked that book out of the school library 12 times. I read it over and over and over. And she was friends with these native kids and would ride her pony bareback. And it was just so exciting. Loved it. So those are some of them. And Pippi Longstocking, I adored her, read her many times too. And then I was also obsessed for a couple years with Robin Hood. And I read every book I
Really?
could get my hands on about Robin Hood. So I wonder what
I
Robin Hood would
love
do in
that.
the US today.
I was a huge Hardy Boys fan. I went through all the Hardy Boys books, and then I went to Nancy Drew just because I enjoyed them so much. I ended up reading the Nancy Drew afterwards. But I just loved a good mystery back then. I kind of loved just the playfulness of those books, and that really kind of ignited my fire early on. So yeah, those kind of things inspire with you and stay with you. What kind of a writer were you? Did you like to? Were you more drawn to settings, or you said you're a wordsmith? Did you like to really describe the location more? Did you get really into characters, or what was your first kind of foray into writing, as far as what really drew you?
It was more character than, but I liked setting too because I liked that I could create how something looked and felt with words. But I I was really intent for a while in grade school to write poetry. And it was bad, but I tried hard. And the good thing about writing poetry as a creative writer is it really forces you to choose words carefully. And I
Mm.
think that was a good experience for me. Stephen King even says every writer should write poetry to experience, compression and the essence of every word. So I didn't know what I was doing, but it was probably a good exercise for me. I wrote this long poem about Abraham Lincoln that I remember. So,
Yeah, they say the
but
writer's friend is
more,
editing, so you need to learn to
sorry.
edit early on. I learned that very early on.
Yeah, I remember the my Abe Lincoln poem that was like 2 pages long and all the cross outs, and I did a lot of editing on that poem, but nobody else thought it was a rave besides me. I
And
was
then
my own
what?
fan.
I love that. Did you have a specific genre you were interested in writing at first? I mean, now you do such different things for young adults and for children. What were your who were you writing for beside yourself earlier on?
I never even thought about who I was writing for. I just
Hmm.
wanted to create the story. And I I did a lot of, in grade school, I did a lot of main characters as animals, like a horse that escaped and she was narrating, or maybe it was probably third person, but it was a point of view from the horse when all the adventures she had when she escaped the pen, and stuck her head through the house window. So I did a lot of animals at the beginning, and then there were more character driven, like characters and their friendships or their relationships.
And so you talk about being a cyclist and an outdoor enthusiast. Was those the inspirations for all these adventures you were having at first, or what? Where did all these inspirations come from?
Well, there was a progression. As a kid, I begged for a pony for my 8th birthday. And since I lived on a farm, my mom and dad tried everything to talk me out of getting a hay burner, but they finally gave in because there was nothing else I wanted. So I got a Shetland pony for my birthday. And then that I never was without a pony until I graduated from high school. And then, like, I got half quarter horses later when I needed something bigger. So I rode, and my friend that lived a mile away and I would meet halfway on our ponies and go for rides. So we spent a lot of time after school and on weekends riding together. And then when I graduated from high school and went off to college and lived in a town, I missed that so much, that outdoor. And it took me a while to realize that was what I missed, the moving through the air, outside, animals.
Mm.
And so I became a runner first because I needed to move out. And I feel like it was a direct translation from riding horses. And I ran for 20 years. And then I broke my knee and could no longer run. I tried, I rehabbed. And after running a half marathon the next week, I was in pain, but I was running anyway. And I went out and my knee just gave out and I just launched across the pavement.
Oh
And
no!
that was the end of my running career. So I became a cyclist that spring because I needed to be outside moving through the air. And ever since, I've ridden a lot. So I also am just super active. I think I probably, if I had been born 40 years later, I would have been put on ADHD medication because I don't sit still well. But
Right?
that didn't occur to them in the 60s.
I
So
love that.
I burn that energy by needing to be outside and be active. And then that translates to my characters because honest to God, I don't understand sedentary characters. So I have to have my characters be pretty active. And they have to have a
Well,
passion because I don't understand people that aren't passionate about something.
right. And I love your use of location, everything. I think that's from what you said about early on, just be voraciously reading and learning about these different areas. I think that's so important to kind of bring those aspects into a book, and especially when you're younger, to have those kind of experiences that even if they kind of settle in the back of your mind, you may not be thinking of at the time, but this is something that's going to slowly build as your vocabulary builds over time, right?
Yes, absolutely. And if you feel like you have empathy for people from very different backgrounds who may be far less privileged, you aren't the person who builds a wall.
Love that. Now, was
You know?
Chasing Alley Cat one of your first major books published? Talk about that. How did that story come to you, and when was that originally published?
Okay. It was my second novel. Actually, the third novel I wrote. I wrote one novel that will forever just be in the drawer. I wrote it before. Yeah. I wrote it before we saved manuscripts on the computer. I had an electric typewriter. That was it. But I sent it off. I'll kind of go through the progression of these first two books and then I'll get to that, answer your question, if that's okay. That first book was about a girl who became a runner when she moved to town. Gosh, wonder where I got that idea. I think it was just far too autobiographical to be good fiction. And I got a lot of standard rejections. This Thank you for your submission. This book does not meet our current editorial needs. Got a lot of those. And then I finally got a personal letter from David Gale at Simon and Schuster, and I memorized it because it was personal. Dear Becky, you write very well. You have a great sense of teenagers. but your storyline is too much like others I've seen. If you write anything more idiosyncratic, please send it my way. So the first thing I did, look up idiosyncratic. and and then,
That's
that
amazing.
means
Does that even happen in the
specific.
publishing world anymore where the publishers take the time to write back? I mean, what do? You send out 80 self-addressed stamped envelopes and you might see 3 of them come back anymore? Or how's that working these days?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this was handwritten because we weren't using email yet for primary, communication. So, but that I just stuck it in the drawer, my stack of paper manuscript, and thought, what do I know that's idiosyncratic? Well, Iowa farm life, and I haven't seen too many novels about Iowa farm life, so I'm going to do that. So I just stuck 2 teenagers out in an oats field chasing fireflies, and the story took off from there, and that became my first novel, which is Jake Riley, Irreparably Damaged. So that
Bad
one was
boy.
published in 2000. Sorry?
I read the synopsis on that. He's a bad boy. I read that.
Yeah, he is. But he has a good side too. He's a bad boy, but he has a good side. As everybody does. Well, most people. So that came out in 2003. And then I'll tell you this because people listening who want to write might find this interesting. Nobody told me, not my editor, not my agent, nobody told me that I was the one who had to promote my book. I thought the publisher would do it. HarperCollins published it. I figured they set up my initial launch reading. They set me up at a bookstore in Minneapolis, and they set me up at our local Barnes and Noble in the first week. And so I thought they were going to send me kind of on a little Midwest tour, but then I was talking to my editor on the phone. And he goes, "Well, make sure you let me know every time you do a book event." And I went, "Aren't you setting them up?" He goes, "Oh, we don't do that for first time authors. We just get you going." And I said, "Well, I got a 14-page questionnaire from you guys where I had contacts, who I knew, what towns I'd lived in, what publications do I subscribe to?" And I said, "What, don't you use that?" And he said, "Oh, no, we just put that in the file." Thanks. I spent 3 days filling that thing out.
Wow.
So I did not have a clue I was supposed to promote my own book, and I didn't know how, and I didn't think I could call myself an author, so I hadn't gone to author conferences because I hadn't published a book. And so I finally started doing those things, and the very first author conference I went to, the first session was, how do you promote your own book? Because publishers don't do that unless you're J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. So I learned the hard way. And so Jake Riley did not sell off the charts by any means. And it went out of print after a couple years. But the same publisher who just re released Chasing Alley Cat wants to re release it next year. And I'm kind of excited because it's been out of print since 2006, I think. So I'm excited. But then your question was about Chasing Alley Cat. So this was the original cover, and this came
Oh,
out
wow.
in 2011. Yeah, Flux did this, uh, and I really liked working with Flux. They're an imprint of Llewellyn Worldwide Publishers, and Brian Ferry was my editor, and I just loved working with him. It was a great experience. And Chasing Alley Cat had been out for maybe 3 years when Flux got sold, and all their books, but like maybe 5, went out of print. So that's why I'm so excited that it's been re-released. And this is what the new cover looks like. This is my bookmark, but you can see
Oh, I love that.
the new cover. I do too. I'm really
Nice.
excited about it. A professional photographer who um, does photos for pro mountain bike races and gravel races took this picture and let me buy it for the cover. So he was excited. He said, I've never had a photo on a cover before. So it's cool. His name is Chase, Taylor Chase, and his website is Chase in Color, if anybody's interested in that. So do you want me to tell you about the story of chasing Alley Cat? I can, ask your cohort Jeff person. I can fill airspace very easily. I just talk.
That's okay. I love that. It always helps me. I mean, I always feel my best interviews are where I say very little. So I appreciate that. But there's a lot of things I do want to talk about because we're talking about that first book and having to do your own promotion, and everything. No such thing as social media back then. And now you have your cover on your phone, you're able to show. So talk about that changing just in finding audiences and selling to audiences. It's got to be a huge change just in a relatively short amount of time.
It really is. And that happened between Jake Riley and Chasing Alley Cat. By the time Chasing Alley Cat came out, people were doing blog tours. And, like you could sign up for a young adult blog tour and get blogged about on all these YA book reviewer sites. And I got some, of course, you always get a few negative things, but I got some wonderful comments and reviews on some of those blogs. It was really fun. But it's so time consuming. When I was teaching full time, I was trying to write. I just gave up writing while I was promoting it because I was filling out stuff online every day, which is good, but it's time consuming. And nobody
There
tells
you
you
go.
that, And also
Yeah, it's
self
tough. I mean, a lot
promotion.
of it, a lot of authors these days incorporate the whole family. They have the husbands, the children, and everything. The kids know how to do the social media, so they help with that. The husband understands booking things, so that's. But a lot of authors, when you're by yourself, and especially the first time, it's very weird road to kind of navigate. So I
It
understand that
is.
completely.
And my
Now,
friend Megan Cool, go ahead.
was there anything
You go
from the
ahead.
time it was originally published to now that you wish you always was there something you ever kind of wanted to change in revisiting it, or is this a pure revisiting to the story? And was there anything in it that you thought, oh wow, I wish I could have just done that back then? Or are we looking at just a total new re-release?
That's such a great question for this book specifically, because in the opening chapter, so I'm not revealing too much, the three mountain biking characters are riding through the woods. The big local mountain bike race is coming up in a few weeks, so they're training really hard. And one of them crashes and rolls down in a ravine, and he starts yelling because there's a body at the bottom of the ravine, and he almost lands on top of it. And it's covered up with a tarp, but the feet are sticking out. And he starts yelling, get down here. And the body's still alive, and it's a priest, has been beaten and left for dead. And so Allie, the title character, rides for help because there's no cell service at the bottom of the hill, and disappears. She doesn't come back. So the other two, Sadie and Joe, are left to chase. Like, where the heck is she? Is she connected to this priest somehow? So they're and she Allie is also the expert mountain biker. So they're always chasing her when they're out riding, but now they're chasing her because they need to find where she is. So there's a double entendre with that title. But what I just told you was that there was no cell service. When I wrote the book before 2011, it took a few years to get it published. Nobody had cell phones. Kids,
Right.
not now, every 16-year-old has a cell phone. Then nobody did. Like a few parents, we had cell phones, but kids didn't. So when I first wrote the book, nobody had cell phones. So Allie went to the gas station to call and disappeared. But with this re-release, I either had to set it, back earlier, or um, have them have cell phones, and that changed so many little things in the plot that what I did was Allie doesn't have enough money for a cell phone, but the other two didn't have service. So those things I had to change by updating the story.
Right. Wow, that's
So
exciting.
that was the main thing. That was really the only thing I wanted to change in the story. So I did a the story is an identical plot, but it's got a few little tweaks here and there, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, I bet. And talk about, I mean, from 2011 now, we're talking 15 years later, just about the changing landscape of young adult literary fiction's got to change as well. Do you kind of notice it since you're writing all along, or when you look at the view from then to revisiting it and you see what's in the zeitgeist out there, is it just a night and day thing, or do you just not notice it because you've been writing all along?
It's night and day. When the first two novels, when Jake Riley and Chasing Alley Cat came out in our local Barnes and Noble in Mankato, Minnesota, which is a pretty big Barnes and Noble. It's not huge, but it's big. The young adult section was one small hip high shelf that ran maybe 20 feet, and that was the young adult section. It was in the very back corner, butt up against the children's section, which was huge and colorful. And then right next to it was, I think, mysteries, adult mysteries or whatever. But you had to look for the YA section. It was not. And now
Right.
walk into the same Barnes and Noble, and there are one, two, three, four, five huge bookshelves that, and you walk right into them when you walk into the store. They are front, center, middle of the store because everybody reads YA. It's not just 12 to
Sure.
18 year olds. Lots of people like young adult fiction, but that landscape has changed completely.
I bet. Wow. And your writing always explores themes of like friendship and resilience and self discovery. How do you approach the themes in a way that's going to connect to your younger readers? How do you think down to that level? Or is it not, is that the point? You don't think down to anybody. How do you bring those topics into your readership?
I don't think down, because we say, oh, that's just a 12-year-old's perspective or a 15-year-old's perspective. Oh, well, he's only 16. What do you think? Those kids have sophistication in how they see the world. They just don't have as much experience, but they feel things the same way, and things are bigger drama to kids than, they are to us as adults. But I'm not a huge fan of the YA books that make huge drama out of she looked at me wrong and she said something nasty about me, and oh, did you see her outfit? I can't read those books. I can't stand them. So I want my books to be books that a 12-year-old will fall into and can't put down, and a 40-year-old will fall into and can't put down. And so I don't think down, but sometimes I just go, okay, a 16-year-old wouldn't probably have this insight, but they can have this insight and they can learn some of that in the course of the story. So that's what I try to do. But I try to just put myself into those characters. And since I mentioned earlier that my mom wasn't a terrific parent to a teenager because she
Right.
didn't really know how to do that. And I swear that I started writing YA because I wanted to be a more normal teenager. And so in my stories, I get to be me and get to be 16.
Well, and then you touched on it. All authors kind of tend to put a little bit of themselves. I mean, that's rule one of writing, write what you know, right? But do you have any of your characters you've written through the years that you feel is the most Rebecca, or what? Who do you relate to the most?
Um, I think probably Sadie, who is the narrator in Chasing Alley Cat, is the most like me. Um, and of course, there's a little bit of me in everybody, both male and female characters, but I think Sadie is probably the most like me. And I'll tell you how the story came to be because that ties into this too. Um, I was out mountain biking with a bunch of friends at Mount Cato, which is the Mankato, Minnesota ski hill in the winter, and in the summer there's a huge mountain bike on the same mountain. They're not mountains, they're big hills. There's some pretty steep ones, but they're hills. But it's a very technical, tricky mountain bike course. The high school mountain bike league, which started after I wrote this book, uses Mount Cato every other year for the state championship race because it's one of the two hardest courses in the state. So it's tricky, but it's also a lot of fun. So anyway, I was out riding with a bunch of friends one weekend day at Mount Cato, and there's a couple switchbacks with rocks and a drop off that I just can't do. Like, I have to stop and walk my bike through that and then ride on, because I just freeze. I can't do that very technical stuff. It scares me. So I came flying down the hill and stopped, and my adrenaline was going, and I was exhausted because I'd done a couple trips around. And I just sitting on my bike watching other people come through. And this girl named Jenna Zander, who is now Jenna Reinhardt, and she's now a pro mountain biker, pro gravel rider.
Wow.
She was probably 19 at the time. I'm not sure. She came flying down the hill on this tricky descent, and I'd been like riding my brakes the whole way, getting over the route, going around this rock. She's just flying, and she made it look so easy, and she was fast as a cheetah, and she, flew over the last bounce and came across what would be the finish line in a race. And I was like, I wish I could ride like that, but I just can't. But I went home and wrote about riding like that. And I wrote it just about this girl flying down the hill and how graceful and beautiful it was. And then I wrote it from the first person. Like, well, hey, in a book, I could be that expert rider.
Right.
And so I wrote it from first person, and it sounded like BS. It was a lie. Like, it sounded arrogant. It sounded full of this character, full of herself, and it did not work. So I rewrote the whole scene. It was about 5 paragraphs. And I rewrote the whole scene from the point of view from a girl watching her who wished she could ride like that. And it worked. It was like, that's it. I have 2 characters. I have 2 mountain bikers of very different levels. I have 2 characters, but I don't have a story. And then about a couple months later, I was walking my dogs. I had 2 at the time, down by the Blue Earth River. And at the time, in this one neighborhood that's depressed on the edge of Mankato, there's a trailer court right by the river. And I was walking my dogs down there, and I came upon this section of the woods where there was like a mile where it was full of trash. And I don't mean just papers and cans. There was chairs and sofas and beds and kettles and entire kitchen. There was an entire kitchen in one ravine. Stove, refrigerator, pots, pans, dishes, forks, knives. I thought, what, did they have a fight and somebody threw out the kitchen? Anyway, I was walking through those woods, and I thought, you could hide a body here and nobody'd ever find it. And I went, mountain bikers could find it. I have 2 characters. I have a story. So that's how Chasing Alley Cat began.
I love that progression. That's amazing. That's a great way to build a story too. Goodness. Now, do you have you talk about inspiration. You're getting inspiration from these different places, from actually writing and from talking to this. Do you have any rituals though in your writing? Do you have a certain place you have to write from? Do you have to have are you pretty much open where you can just take the computer and write anywhere? Do you write longhand? Does hubby know to stay away if you're in a certain corner of the room? How's your process go?
My favorite place to write is at my computer in my little library office, which is in the basement of our house. And I am, got my books with me, and I just love falling into my story sitting at that desk. But I can write anywhere. I always have a notebook with me. and I write longhand for story ideas, and sometimes a sentence will come to my head, and then I know I can build a scene from that sentence. And so I have sentences galore like that, and characters. I see somebody interesting, like, oh my gosh, that would be fun to put somebody like that character in my story. I walk through graveyards with notebooks sometimes and collect names because they're not using them anymore.
I
So
learned that in a writing
I do
class
a
that that's a
lot.
good place to find names for characters. So I've done the same thing. So
Yeah,
yeah, I like that.
yeah, it's fun too. It's something peaceful about being among the dead who have the whole view of the universe.
Now you write for so many
So and I
genres. When oops, I'm sorry to interrupt. When you're writing for
no
these
go.
different genres, do the ideas come at you? Do you know who your audience is going to be at that time, or do you have to develop it more? It's like you get a plot for a story. You know, this is going to be a young adult. It's going to be more for children. This is going to be for adult. Do they kind of come full form like that when you first get the idea, or do you have to play with them a bit to decide which genre to put them in?
I have to play with it. And the idea, I care about the story and letting the characters live their story way more than I care about the audience. Like I'm
Hmm.
just living that story. And it's like I write like I'm watching a movie. Like I try to create each scene so it's very visual and the characters carry it. And then I figure out who this is for. The story has to be its own thing, and then I figure it out. For some of the children's books I've written, I started out thinking it needed to be for children, but the young adult stuff just is a story with characters, and then I craft it into what will work for young adult. But the children's stories, I knew I needed to start um, with simpler language, simpler sentences, and ideas that were clear and visual that would be easy to depict. And so I approached the children's stuff differently. Um, my favorite children's book that I've written, I don't have a copy here, but it's called Medusa Tells All, Beauty Missing, Hair Hissing.
Oh, I love that title. I love that title.
I do too. It was so much fun to write. When I was teaching at South Central College, I taught lots of writing classes, composition, creative writing, but I also taught humanities, and we did a huge unit of mythology. I just love mythology. And I always, when we would tell Medusa's story, I always felt like she got a bad rap. Athena turned her into the monster because Poseidon had raped her in Athena's temple. She got a bad rap, even though she was vain. That was her only sin. But so Medusa tells the story. It's her point of view. She tells the story, and of course it ends with, and he cut off my head, and I am dead. you know, but I will live forever because if you look into my shield, into Athena's shield, you'll see my face. Look, if you dare. So, so I had a blast writing that. That's my favorite children's story that I wrote.
I love that story. That sounds amazing. Well, we got to start wrapping it up, Rebecca. Tell me what memorable moments or lessons that you learned in the early days of writing after doing this so many years now really keeps with you now. What did you learn that kind of that's really kind of helped you throughout your career? That's something you always look back on, and I'm glad I learned that. Or what's something that you maybe did early on that you're glad you don't do anymore?
The first thing that comes to mind is um, when we're writing, we'll always come upon something that we think is a little clunky, or uh, like we're just not completely committed to how we got that on the page. And when I started writing, I think, oh, it's okay, it's good. But without a fail, if I was questioning it, it needed to be changed. Absolutely. If I was wondering, that meant it had to be edited, it had to go or be changed. So listen to that initial gut, I think. If it has to be absolutely the way you feel, it creates the scene, the character. And if you are doubting it, go with the doubt. Fix it. That's one big thing.
That's some great advice. What do you have in the old computer at home now? What are you working on currently?
Well, this past fall when Chasing Alley Cat got re-released, the new version, I got asked to sponsor the Minnesota High School Mountain Bike League races. So I set up a tent and sold books every weekend in September at mountain bike races. And it was so much fun. And I felt like this is my tribe. You know, I don't feel pretentious talking about my riding, because I got a good story about riding mountain bikes. And I had 2 7th grade girls come up to me, one the third and one the fourth week of the races. And they both separately told me, I love that book. That's the best book I've ever read. Both. And I was like, okay, my life is complete.
All
And
right.
one of the coaches,
Wow.
yeah, one of the male coaches who's over 50 told me that it was the first time he'd stayed up all night reading a book. And I was like, yes. So I decided I really need to do another mountain biking book. So I've got, maybe 30 pages of junk written to pursue. I'd like to do another mountain biking story. And I have an idea for a plot, but I can't say it out loud. But that's what I'm working on. And then also the same publisher who did the new version of Chasing Alley Cat, which is Flat Soul Studio, very small press from Minneapolis, wants me to re-release this. So I have to go through this. I have this in the computer too, because I'm combing through those chapters so we can have this out in the world again.
That's fantastic. All righty.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of work to do.
Always something, huh? You got to keep yourself busy there. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming on.
Since I was 4.
Oh, yes. Definitely.
Sorry.
Thank you for being on the Left of Str8 Show interviews, Rebecca. Amazing work. Let everyone know where they can find your fantastic website, learn more about your words and your stories, and where they can follow you on social media if you're on social media.
Okay. So shall I send that to you or put it?
No, just go ahead and let the audience know, and we'll go ahead and put the little chyron down below as well.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, I have a QR code on my bookmark. But it's RebeccaFjellandDavis.com. But if you Google Chasing Alley Cat, the chances are you'll be able to find it. If you go on Amazon and put in Chasing Alley Cat, there's a link to my website there. So I do have the website, RebeccaFjellandDavis.com, but because the middle name is so complicated, it's harder to find. But so it's easier through Chasing Alley Cat on one of the big bookstores. Fantastic. And it's on Indie. You can get it through Indie bookstores, Barnes and Noble too.
Great. We'll put the QR code up here on the screen as well. Rebecca Fjelland Davis, I appreciate you so much. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
This was so much fun, Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, stay on the line because, guys, we're going to have a special 5 questions with Rebecca next week, so be sure to look for that. We appreciate you tuning in every week to Left of Str8 Show interviews. We will see you next time. Keep reading, have some fun, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media and be sure to check out our website for contests and other news and information. See you next week.